Welcome to the GridMod Pod, brought to you by AEIC. In this podcast, you'll hear from the utility industry's top operations leaders on how their companies are working to modernize and improve our ever-evolving power grid. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Lee.
Hi, Lee.
Nice to see you on this rainy day today, but I look forward to this conversation.
Yeah.
As our audience knows, this is the GridMod Pod, where we talk about all things grid modernization, which is especially on the minds as we go through this energy transformation that we're all eager and excited to talk about, as you know. And I'm excited. You're a fellow podcaster, so a little bit nervous to show me up with all your skills. Casual conversation. So, audience, today we have Lee Krevat, who's the CEO of Krevat Energy Innovations, and he's also the host of the Climate Champions podcast. So before we jump into all the topics that get us excited, Lee, why don't you introduce yourself and kind of the background of where you've been? I think we're kindred spirits. We've been on the same journey, just maybe at slightly different times in this industry.
Yeah, I started out Silicon Valley computer science person and was recruited by Sempra when they merged. That was SDG&E and SoCal Gas. They brought me up really from an IT perspective to lead the effort of bringing those together. And it was a good time. And I thought I would just stay with the company for a year or two. But then I kind of fell in love with the energy industry, mostly because it gave me a mission beyond just doing a good job and getting promoted and getting raises. Suddenly I was responsible for something important, keeping the lights on in San Diego and LA, and that's pretty important. So I fell in love with the industry, eventually discovered that I could take my knowledge of technology and bring it to the industry. And so I was a pretty early person involved with grid modernization, or as we called it, smart grid.
Which, I mean, to those that know me, I mean, everything you said resonates very well with myself. You know, like the fact that we get to be in an industry where we're providing the lifeline to society and we're actively looking at the technical phenomena and really getting into the nuts and bolts of how it all works. You know, we can really influence maybe some of the decisions that are being made that may not actually understand that. So, you know, the reason for, I love doing the Grid Mod Pod is that we're educating and bringing that awareness to those folk that are driving policy, regulatory changes, and all other types of conversations that happen that don't really see how challenging, but I think there are solutions. And I think one of the biggest solutions is really this merge of how important the IT world and really the communication of data is to this ultimate reality that we're on, which is the grid modernization journey, which, as you said, is the smart grid journey, which started about 20 years ago. So here we are, still trying to champion that awareness and really bring it to the forehead so we can move forward and just embrace all new technology, really.
One of the great things at San Diego Gas and Electric was that initially it was very difficult spanning between the different silos, the different groups responsible for different things, especially because I had an IT background. But once we got through that, what was fantastic is having meetings where there were people, passionate people from each of the organizations there. They had to work together, and they did work together to make change happen. I think once we hit that point, that's what allowed us to do great projects and really make a better, stronger, better for the customer, better for the utility place to be.
Right. And like when you think about like what that takes to really identify kind of, I don't know, purple squirrels, like IT folk that kind of get the power systems realm and interlacing them into all of the different parts of a utility. You know, one thinks that it should just happen overnight, but there's a very complex web of the utility space that has grown over 100 years, set in their ways. And now we're literally asking humans that understand their job to learn everyone else's job so they're all effectively working towards the same goal. And just saying it's complicated. Yeah. So, you know, I think what's beautiful about this podcast is we can share some experiences, which, you know, I think you can share, and maybe some of the cool innovation that you're seeing in your space that is really allowing those compartments to like see each other as like needing each other and then moving, you know, forward. So, you know, Are there any fun stories or kind of like journeys that you like to share? It was a very challenging issue, and then you guys created a solution or something that was valuable to get us to where we want to go, which I guess should we level set? Where do we want to go? I mean, we want to serve power safely, affordably, which isn't key, reliably, resilient. We got to put in the resilience as well as sustainable, which is kind of your jack, right? So any particular stories or initiatives that you've been working with that you want to share?
Well, I'm torn between talking about the good old days at San Diego Gas and Electric or the new days. I think I'll stay on the new days. I left Sempra about 5 years ago now in order to pursue climate technology full time. One of the wonderful things about working at Sempra was that we had an unregulated arm that was investing in solar and wind, batteries eventually. I started the distributed part of that business, looking at distributed solar. I actually convinced the company to invest in another company called Sol Systems, based out of Washington, D.C. That is a fantastic company. Yuri Horowitz is the CEO there. And it was wonderful working with them, but it convinced me that I want to be focused on that type of thing full time. So when Sempra decided to sell the renewables business, I decided to go out on my own. I started Krevat Energy Innovations. First, I thought I was going to be a contractor, consultant, and I found out that I don't really get to be my own boss when you're a consultant. You have a lot of people hiring you and paying you good money to tell you what to do. So I kind of switched to be an advisor. People think that's the same thing. It turns out advising, you say what you think. And if they like the advice you're offering, then they hire you in some way. And it's a lot less oversight and more just discussion about maybe what a company should do. So now I advise in one way or another about a dozen companies on boards, advisory boards. Sometimes I just advise without being on any kind of special board. And so, there's a bunch of companies that I'm super excited about. I think they can help change the world. Some work with the utility, some do not work with the utility, but they're all pretty exciting.
So, like in regards to, I think that's a big space right now because if we think about the evolution of the grid, originally the phenomena of lighting up the night was something that none of us could fathom or even understood past, burning our candles and then ultimately, utilizing dynamos and arc brush lighting or whatever that was called. Don't quote me, really smart people out there. And then evolved into the system that we know today. But those that were creating it were also in charge of operating it. We're also in charge of like identifying how to get it paid for. And then over time, we created larger systems because it was more efficient to own more assets and you could scale and serve more people. And then we got to a point of, well, we don't really need this super intelligence of how all the devices work internally. We can give that to the vendors who actually give us. And then we really created a separation with a regulatory model. It's like, well, we really don't need the people that actually understand all the systems work to like help drive what we should be doing for all the changes. And so now we have all of these stakeholders outside looking at it. And so you have the utility stuck with the same job, which is to maintain reliable power. So now come to 2024, we have this vendor space, right? This innovation that is plentiful and game changer, right? There's game changers everywhere. But how, have you seen, or maybe a particular company that has shown value, and you don't have to talk specifics to the actual utility, but like a particular product and how they integrate it into a utility to show like proof of concept and how to scale that. I think that's at the core is the people and the processes. So you might have a technology that's extremely valuable. Well, how do you get a utility to say, through all the noise and really get that kind of project going?
Yeah, I'll talk about some of the noise first, because you've hinted at it.
Okay, let's do it.
So here we have a utility that is responsible for reliability. That's the number one. Safety, number one. Reliability, number two. So when you're responsible for that, it's understandable that you're not excited about new things. Why would that be exciting? Because that introduces risk. And your whole job is to prevent risk to your customers. So I understand that. And it takes a lot for a new product to get past that. And then the other thing is, and this isn't putting it down or anything, but at utilities or large companies, like other large companies, you generally don't get ahead by taking risk. You generally get ahead by successfully doing what's been done before on budget. Like, so there are other drivers than innovation for most utilities and for most people. It's not that you can't, but it's not rewarded. It's not the safe path to take.
Right. Like,
So,
so you're putting yourself at risk.
Yes, you are. I had a boss. I went to him and I said, "Hey, listen, I want to change your Sun Microsystems. I hear they're not doing too well. IBM just gave us $1 million lower offer. Can we go with IBM?" And he said, "No, Sun." And I said, "It's really a mistake." He said, "Listen, if you want to go with IBM instead of Sun, because I've got a relationship with Sun," he said, "then it's on your neck if something goes wrong." I said, "But I'm sticking my neck out to save the company money. You're mad at me. I'm not like helping my career to do this." In the end, 6 months later, Sun was gone. So it was really good.
And really, I think the word innovation seems to scare those, because it can mean exchange, adaptability, fail fast. I mean, all of what comes with that.
But as I said, there's good reason for that. There's good reason for that, right?
Yeah.
It's based on the business that the utilities are in. But there are people in every utility and every group that have that innovative gene and they want to make change and they put it forth.
Innovator spirit.
Yeah, they're in there. And sometimes a product is just so good that even people that don't want to take risk get excited about it. You ask about a specific one. So I will talk about one that blew me away by how fast they became used by utilities. And that is a company called GridWrap, which we've talked about. And they have two products, wire wrap and pole wrap. And pole wrap is one of those products that people that don't want to change at the utility, and of course people that do want to change, when they see it, they say, "Holy moly." That's a Captain Marvel's saying, "Holy moly." That I feel like I could say on the air.
I like it.
This is an interesting product. So almost all utilities, not all, but most, have pole problems where they have wooden or concrete poles that have issues, starting at like woodpecker problems to fire problems to just decay problems, all kinds of problems. And
there are vehicle accidents.
Yeah, in the extreme cases. And they're replacing, in this country, millions of poles a year get replaced. And when that happens, that's an outage. And that's also somehow getting a crane, in some cases a helicopter in there to get the pole there. And it takes a full crew. It's an expensive proposition. Again, it affects reliability. And a lot of these poles don't even get replaced because how painful it would be. In Italy, these streets are really small. They can't even get poles to the location they need very easily. It's very expensive. So this guy comes to me, Davud is his name. He's got a material that you wrap around a pole, and no matter how damaged it is, unless it's completely broken in half and both halves are in different places. I mean, as long as this thing can be mended, he wraps this composite material around the pole, and the pole is now 3 to 4 times stronger than it was when it was new. And it seems like, how can that be? But it is.
Right. And I think that's like a whole other world of material science and the innovation that was in that space. So when you say, so you wrap the pole and the materials that are being used ultimately use the old pole as just a mold, and then the wrap in itself becomes the actual structure. So it doesn't actually matter what's inside that pole. Is that kind of?
And I didn't really get that at first. I actually loved it.
Which is that's amazing.
I thought it was just band-aiding the pole. I didn't realize it was the new pole. And the old thing inside doesn't matter. There are vendors that sell composite poles. They're all hollow. So he's just using, as you said, the wood or the concrete as a mold. So now he has a hollow composite material pole that is much stronger than a wooden pole. It's also fireproof. So you get fire protection. You get something that's much stronger, no outage. It's pretty amazing. And the reason I bring it up is because it defied the rule of the utility, where we think that it takes years and years to get a new product there. When you have the right product that is obviously a game changer, it opens eyes and they
Right.
want.
And, if you think about all of the ways that like new technology, new ways is kind of crept down, like we don't, it takes a really long time to go to like the regulators and those that kind of can call the rules and push it down. And we've seen technology have to be embraced from that method, but this could be like a ground up and also in the hands of the field where they would probably like seek this. So like, I think there's like a really important innovative part maybe that the grid mod and really the education, the platform, the language is how do we share and communicate like what it means to anyone in a utility space to be thinking that way. And we actually had a guest on that actually talked like he saw something happening in the field recurringly and he literally designed a device, based on a very specific need to himself that's now becoming incredibly valuable. And I think also with everything going on with the smart grid or grid modernization and technology and data and AI and we could all the kind of the unflashy stuff, work management, how to make the actual physical work that we've been doing for 100 years better, easier, more intelligent. So what you just shared is an example of that. We could take something that exists, has been proven in multiple utilities and literally deploy it. Love it.
Yeah. And that's the hard part. You said multiple.
Do you want to share another example?
Yeah, I will. Right. You said multiple utilities, and that is very difficult, getting to multiple utilities. It's hard getting one, but of course, one gets you 2 or 3, and then you can get a lot more. One really is the most difficult one. I have a company that I work with. I actually loaned him money early on to help him launch the company, and he has a way of virtualizing data storage. So we all know about storage, energy storage. And so it doesn't get a lot of attention in grid mod or smart grid, but there's a tremendous amount of money and energy wasted on multiple copies of the same very, very large files. There's a story that's pretty true in the storage industry where when people buy new storage, like let's say they have a 1 terabyte, nowadays they wouldn't have a 1 terabyte. But let's say they have a 1 terabyte storage disk. When it gets to have 600 gigabytes on it, they start to panic and they buy a 3 terabyte disk. And the first thing they do is they take their 600 and they put it on there. And then when it gets to 2, where they're 60% of the way, they're buying another large one. And then they have a production one, a QA, a development. And then they have to make copies of it because they want it different locations. And people are asking for access, so they give them copies of it as well. And now with AI, they make entire copies of all their data so they can put it in the Amazon cloud or the Google cloud. So you have so many copies of this data. And this guy has a patent and came up with a way where you have one copy and it's mirrored. So it's in 2 different data centers that like a utility would approve. And then everybody that wants it thinks they have a copy. They actually see it as if it were a copy on their computer, but really that's just a pointer. And it points back to this one location where it is, and they're able to operate on it as if they had it, but it's in one place, being cooled by one HVAC system, and the electricity is spinning it with one energy system, and you don't have all these copies. And another excellent thing about it from a risk perspective is now you don't have copies laying around everywhere. People don't have an actual copy to be ransomed, or let's say you have a third party that needs access to the data. Now you can give them access, but in the agreement say they're not allowed to download it because as far as they're concerned, they have access to it. It's on their computer. But now when the engagement with them is over, you just take away that access and they don't have the files anymore.
Yeah, so you hit upon like many areas that this patent, this idea, this concept could benefit across the whole fleet of utility business units just in itself, right? And so like there's another conundrum. Like finding someone within the utility space that understands every business unit, that is a doer, and like not, at a certain level that doesn't have the capacity to actually do and create and communicate, right? So there's like a level, but like what you just said, that idea may not even be on anyone's mind. What they're focused on is deploying devices that will create massive amount of data. And that data has a cost to it, which I don't think we put language around, like to create it, to pull it, to store it, to distribute it, right? So then there's the whole data cloud strategy. And so this is like the next layer up. It's like, okay, now that you're creating and producing all these data and creating digital twins, there's a way to really consolidate, really collapse, unify, and have one point of connection. And then also, if we do it more intelligently and handle our data better, like all of these data centers that are like energy hungry, but really that's mostly due to what? The heat they produce. So maybe we got more intelligent and create ventilation systems to make them produce less. Anyway, that's a whole other topic. But if they need less to store less data, there could be less pull on the grid.
Yeah, this company RestoreVolt, they don't have a utility customer yet, but they have dozens of customers, not utility. And I think it's harder to break into utility, as you said. But when they finally do break into utilities, I think a lot of the utilities will want to do this. One thing I didn't say is 80% of the data isn't even touched. It's maybe read, but it isn't changed.
I mean,
it's just sitting there.
What's the 80-20 rule? Like, 80% of, your plans.
And it is 80-20 for this. 80-20 is structured versus not structured. And then of the not structured data, which is 80%, about 80% isn't touched. So you're at about 65% of the data is being multiplied 5 times, sometimes 10 times, sometimes more, and it isn't even being touched. And here's a way of just consolidating all of that in a super safe way, wherever the utility wants to put it.
Right. So like 80% of the output is created from 20% of the input, right? Ironically, I tried to say this word yesterday and I told a big audience that I have it in my brain spelled, but I can't say it. My brain works that way. It's Pareto.
What is it?
Pareto. But I don't even want to say it. Anyway, but that's that's fascinating. Yeah, Pareto. So it's the Pareto Principle.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's been proven over and over and over again that like 20% of the doers create 80% of the product. So it's a little bit vice versa, but whatever. So I think that's another fascinating one. And I think as a part of the utility, a hesitation around data and where you're storing data is the cybersecurity aspect, right? There's such a heightened level, which there should be, in regards to how to protect the data. But ironically, because a lot of these tools are evolving very quickly and the utility space is very slow because of their risky nature of, we're creating massive amounts of databases that really probably could be much more secure if we had an awareness of this capability. So, creating the forums, creating the discussions is very important.
RestoreVolt is actually certified, has the California certification, which is pretty hard to get. So it's safe with the data.
Not saying it's not. I wasn't saying it wasn't. I was just saying any project around data, is a heightened, now your champions are even challenged to another level within the utility.
I was just bragging. But what's also exciting is a utility can put it in its own data center. He'll just install it on their server and their storage, and he'll just charge what is ever used, so the utility can get that benefit of not having to worry about expanding it or paying for what they're not using. Yeah. So they get the benefit of a cloud situation without a cloud.
I like to always tie back things that we're talking about to the relativity of the grid modernization roadmap. So just real quick. So when we're talking about all this data, right, we're going from almost having very limited data, which most of us are still sitting in that state, where there are certain devices in our system that create measurements such as volt, var, and watts that are very important to the overall stability of the transmission and the operation of the distribution. And those variables are studied differently based on transmission distribution, which is another note for all your listeners. Do not think they're one. They're very separate, even though the phenomena is similar. Anyway, so you're running these power flow solutions every 4 minutes in all your operations room. You're pulling in millions of nodes and you're able to create, and optimize. But going to the next level, what we're talking about is connecting the edge of the grid, which is now going to create billions, if not, the next level up of data points. And we need to create information. So as you just said, a lot of the data that we even create doesn't get utilized. So being more intelligent about this new inertia of data, and then how do we solidify it, keep it secure, gain access to some of it, is really what the technology you're speaking to that could serve. So it's really exciting. So we should, bring that to light too. Any other fun shares that you want to bring to the
I could go on and on.
space?
I can go on and on. Here's one
more.
All right. It's very interesting, this one. I think you'll find this one very interesting because it's one of those where, at least what I'm finding, is utilities really like it, but they also are concerned about it. So this is a product from a company called Connector, Connect-DER, that has a meter socket adapter. So you pull the meter, put this in, then you put the meter back on top of it. And what it does is, for the probably millions of homes that are going to be, or many have, especially in California, where they buy an EV, but their panel, let's say they have a 100 amp, 125 amp panel, it's old in California, there's tons of these homes, and they can't put another 32, another 40 amps on the panel. And so they're faced with a $5,000 panel upgrade. A lot of the utilities have $500,000, $1,000 rebates if you upgrade your panel. And what this does is it makes that not necessary. It's more like $1,000. You could put the EVSE into the meter socket, and you're thinking, Lee, but wait a second, then we're going to go over 100 amps. So that's electrically not allowed, and it shouldn't be done. But it's been NERDL tested, NERDL certified to UL 414. It measures how much energy the whole house is using. And so when you get to 80% of the max, it interrupts the load and just stops charging. And because, it's a load that can be interrupted. That's one of the beautiful things about an electric vehicle. You can also put a hot water heat pump on there, for example, on that. So the utilities kind of want electrification. They want more EVs. They want level 2 charging instead of level 1, so that people don't have to charge during peak. They can do all their charging super off peak,
Right,
because they get it done so much faster. So they love all that, at least the people we talk to. But they're very concerned about, do we really want this device sitting behind our meter? And what's the process? And so we're finding, once we get past that and we figure out the process, then we get there. But it's a lot harder, I think, than even utilities want it to be, because they want EVs to be adopted. And here's something that makes that so much easier.
right. So what I'm hearing, just maybe from there's excitement in this space. So everyone's talking about the grid is not ready and it cannot handle EV proliferation. And just like a fun fact, which I don't know why it's fun, maybe it isn't to others, is from a utility's perspective, there was something called poles and hot tubs, and the whole Jones effect. It's not past our purview that if a couple homes on a particular transformer would install a pole, you didn't really have to tell the utility, well, that transformer will eventually, pop because you're using it more than you thought. So there is this phenomena that, yes, if everyone starts plugging in their cars into their home, you're going to overload the basic service, which is that pole top transformer that's, the can on the pole, or the pad mount transformer, a little, green box in your yard for your underground service. What you're saying is this device could be placed on a home, and the homeowner doesn't have to upgrade their panel, which is a deterrent for, a lot of people to get electric vehicle charging. So there's that. And then you could do the hot water heater or the charging, and you can set parameters that once it gets to a certain level, that particular home can interact. And so it's not really big brothery. It's really something that you design and put on your own home, and that helps the grid as a whole, as well as the home as an individual. Is that what kind of I'm hearing?
Yeah, and there's no signaling. So what's really cool is it's all in firmware, it's all in the software in the unit. So there's no communication in or out, so there's no security risk. It's just measuring, and it will interrupt that branch. it'll wait 15, actually it'll keep measuring. And when you're back underneath where you could add it back and there wouldn't be a problem, then it starts charging the car again. So it's all automated. It's a great DR tool, right? It takes people off peak. And so,
Right.
again, the hard part isn't that utilities don't get it. They get how
it's the hard part is the fact of where it helps themselves as well as helps the customer. And then there's also the idea who's paying for it and then like who owns it and who has to make sure it operates and how it talks. So that's where then it kind of gets a little bit complicated because like it's for the customer, but also for the grid. But right. So then you get into the complications of how you interact and change kind of the rules that have been maybe made at a time when something like this didn't exist. So it comes the challenges of integrating with utility.
I'm not going to say what utility it is. I probably shouldn't do that, but there is a utility that looks like they're going to approve it very soon here. And they're saying, look, it has to be a licensed electrician that we approve, but as long as it is and they've been trained, they can come and they can do the replacement. They just have to let us know so we can relock it and we're good with it. So we don't expect all utilities to be that easy with regards to the process. The key is that you just have to define that process. And once you do, then you have a way to save the customer a bunch of money, help EVs sell better. Yeah.
And I guess I'll just round our conversation out is like a lot of things are, so the technology is available. The data and the computation, all of these fancy things is available. But what you kind of hit on is, and I hit on, is there's certain mechanisms and processes that have been stood up and exist. And so changing them requires not just those two individuals. It usually requires like 8 or 6. So how do we as an industry come to a universal principles or some language that like we're all in it together for the benefit of all while keeping things competitive in free markets? I get it. But like when we're not talking on the same elements and the complications of it, we kind of just get lost. And then therefore the motivation for the internal stakeholders to do it, becomes harder and harder. Because for me, like that project, all these projects itself, you have to have a champion within, but also know you're going to have to like make sure the regulatory models and all the things that go in there can allow it. And also your financial models, are you able to prove that there is a benefit, not only qualitatively, but quantitatively, which is always a challenge if you don't have actually information to say, hey, here. Not to say it can't be done, but I think we should talk about it so that we are all aware of the work that's required to do to make these amazing, innovative projects that you just shared happen. So
yeah, I think that the 3 I shared with you, because I'm a money guy, that's what I was kind of, before I got into the utility, is I was thinking, is this worth it at computer companies? But all of these have incredible business cases for utility, for customer, all around. They pencil out. Yeah.
I could go do that right now. I see it all too. I mean, I totally agree. Like, I think it's a skill is being able to know what that business cost benefit analysis is. So, awesome. Well, Lee, I love our conversation. I think we could talk about all your innovative projects. Maybe another time you can come back and share some more with our GridMod pod followers, listeners.
GridMod pod, baby.
Yeah. So until next time, thanks again.
All right. No, thank you for having me on the show. I really had a good time. Thank you.
That's a wrap for this week's episode of the GridMod Pod. Thanks for tuning in. We hope today's conversation got you thinking about new and creative ways to improve our power grid. Be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel to be the first to hear new episodes. This podcast is brought to you by AEIC, the place where operations leaders come together to share knowledge and provide guidance to the electric utility industry. We'll be back with a new episode soon. Until then, keep powering on.